This is a wonderful tale about the power of familial love and how it can be found in even the most unlikely of circumstances, even in a world of darker undertones.
Parents. Mother curled a tentacle around her favorite cup, and she brought it up to her mouth. She took a sip of the warm liquid it contained, and then set it back down on the kitchen table. "We're going to have to tell Thomas," she said. Father, who was sitting at the other end of the table, lowered the newspaper he was reading and gave her a disgruntled look. "If we don't tell him now, he's just going to find out when we leave. And then he'll be very confused and scared." Mother continued. "When he gets home from school, I'm telling him," she said insistently. This time Father threw his paper down and raised several tentacles into the air. Another, he pointed at Mother in a fairly threatening manner. "You'll not tell him anything until we've heard back. Do you hear me?" he asked rhetorically. "It's not our place to make these decisions. There's a hierarchy for very good reason. You know we always do things proper. Now stop with your nonsense." Satisfied with his outburst, he lowered his tentacles and went back to reading his newspaper. Mother swiveled her eye stalks away from her husband. She couldn't bear to deal with him when he was in one of his authoritarian moods. He didn't have the right to make important decisions on his own. They were both of equal ranking, and the hierarchy was set up to allow decisions to be made on the ground whenever necessary. She wasn't going to keep arguing with him, but that didn't mean she wouldn't do as she pleased once Thomas got home. Her chair made loud scraping noises on the floor as she got up quickly, and she deliberately banged against the table as she made her way over to the sink to do the washing up. Father briefly lowered his paper again to give a disapproving glare, but he didn't say anything. Mother made sure to clatter the cups and dishes extra loudly as she rinsed each of them off and placed them in the drying rack. "Cuckoo, cuckoo, cuckoo, cuckoo!" The wooden clock on the wall announced the hour before retracting the small bird that had popped out to accompany the bird noises. It was 4 in the afternoon, and Thomas would be home in less than half an hour. Father had gone upstairs for a late afternoon nap, which he often did when he was on early morning shifts. Mother started hoovering, knowing the noise would annoy him. Petty, but she needed small acts of defiance to let him know she was no pushover. As she was thrusting the vacuum cleaner into the front room, she accidentally knocked into the television set and pushed on the power button. The set made an electric pop and then a high-pitched hum as the cathode ray sprang to life and light flickered rapidly from the screen. Mother turned off the vacuum cleaner and rolled her body onto the front room sofa, with her eye stalks fixated on the TV screen. The display was black, save for the center, where a single eye stared out. It blinked a few times, then looked around in several directions before returning to staring directly forward. Mother thought about how much she loved the eye and how she would often fall asleep to it. Much to Father's annoyance, she'd leave the TV on all night while the eye glared at her. Low vibrations pulsed out from the television set, with occasionally faint screaming in the background. It reminded her of home and made the breathing quills on her back quiver. The eye was looking around the room again, and Mother was almost asleep when the familiar slam of the front door snapped her back to wakefulness. Thomas was home. Thomas threw his blazer on the floor and took off his shoes before bounding out of the hallway and into the living room. He took 2 steps into the room, looked at the TV screen, and then started screaming. "Oh my God! Rovers are down 2-0! Mother turned around with her hands on her ears. "Oh, don't shout so loud. I've got a headache." "Oh, sorry," he responded. No worries, love. Do you want your favorite for dinner? She asked. Thomas nodded eagerly before slumping down on the sofa to watch the rest of the game. 20 minutes later, and he was tucking into his fish fingers covered in baked beans. Mother sat opposite, holding a cuppa and watching him eat. Listen, lad, there's something I need to tell you, she said. Thomas only replied with indistinct sounds and breaths as he continued to shovel beans and fish fingers into his face. Mother heard a rumble coming from upstairs, followed by the sound of footsteps. Father was awake, and it sounded like he was heading down the stairs. Never mind, dear, I'll tell you in a bit, she said. A minute later, Father entered the kitchen, just as Thomas was polishing off the last fish finger and a mouthful of beans. Hey there, young'un, how was school? He asked. Thomas made another of his mouth-stuffed grunts, which Father took to be a positive response. Oh, good. He walked around the kitchen table and opened the refrigerator door. Inside the fridge were several glass jars filled with various body parts, ranging from heads, hands, and feet, to some smaller jars that contained as little as a single eye or ear. Father was only a little peckish, so he took one of the small jars and greedily swallowed the contents. Let's just tell him, Mother blurted out, unable to contain herself any longer. Father looked at her while still holding the upturned jar. He emptied the last of its contents into his mouth. Once he'd finished, he put the jar on the counter and then slammed the fridge door shut. Fine, he replied, resigned to the fact that his wife just wouldn't let it lie. He sat down at the far end of the kitchen table next to Mother, and they both waited until Thomas had swallowed his last bite of food. He wiped the bean juice from around his mouth, using the sleeve of his shirt. Normally, Mother would have told him off for dirtying his shirt like that, but much more important matters were currently at hand. Well, go on then, love. Explain to the boy, Father said with an urging gesture aimed at his wife. Okay, I'm going to if you give me a half a chance, Mother replied. She took in a long, deep breath before continuing. You see, the thing is, Thomas, where we are from, it's not like here. Thomas was staring at her with a slightly confused look on his face. We can't have children. Well, not in the way you understand it, Father interrupted emphatically. Mother waved him away. I thought you wanted me to explain everything. Oh, sorry, go on then, he said. Thomas looked at Father, then back to Mother again, blinking a couple of times before Mother continued. We thought that once we'd found each other, that would be enough, and for a while it was. We would get on with our work quite happily, knowing that we would always have that special someone waiting for us. But then we found you. Thomas shifted back in his chair. Some of the colour had drained from his face, and he could feel his heart beating a little faster. His parents looked a little strange. The air around them shimmered and vibrated. We'd never taken care of a child before, and we didn't realize how fulfilling it could be. Mother gave him what she felt like was a warm, human smile. The hairs on the back of Thomas's neck stood on end, and his heart began to pound in his chest. He could feel the beginnings of a cold sweat on his brow. When we first arrived here, you were only 4 or 5, and even though you cried almost every day for a month, eventually you took to us. If Mother could produce tears, she was sure she would be crying over such fond memories. I remember the first time you hugged me. It felt like I'd actually achieved something much more valuable than any of the work I'd done. The joy I'd get just hearing your laughter made every day a blessing. We both feel that way, she said as she looked at Father. Thomas's whole body started to shake, Sweat was running into his eyebrows and his face was deathly pale. His hands felt clammy, and he thought the fish, fingers, and beans he'd just gobbled down were going to rapidly come up again. He couldn't even begin to describe how strange and alien his parents now appeared. So, even though we haven't had official approval yet, we wanted you to know that we'd like to take you home with us, Father interjected. At this point, for Thomas, the world had become a disjointed, dizzying morass of memories and emotions. He was having flashbacks to when he was just a toddler, and there was that scary day that things got into the house, and his parents made blood-curdling screams until everything went quiet. That was the day his parents seemed very different, awkward and stilted in their movements. He remembered them pacing around him while he cried on the floor, like wolves circling their prey. But he also remembers things being a bit better each day. Even though, at first, they brought him weird things to eat, like live kittens and mice. They eventually figured out that he preferred beans and fish fingers. They'd fed him and clothed him, and even though they told strange stories and gave him confusing advice, he knew that they cared about him. Did he want to move somewhere new with them, though? He didn't have many friends at his school or in the neighborhood, 'cause he'd often get picked on for being weird. Maybe the local football team at this other place would be better too. He was sick of having to support bottom-of-the-table rovers. Okay, then let's move, Thomas said, feeling much better about things now. So where is home then? He asked. Mother clasped all her upper tentacles together in delight and replied, "Oh, it's very far away." Her voice was drowned out as the kitchen clock announced the hour